Ozark Season 4 Part 2 Ending Explained. I can't quite believe it's over. 5 years, 4 seasons, and 2 parts later, and we got the ending that I don't think any of us could have quite predicted. The Byrds story came to an end in the conclusive finale, but what did it all mean? Well, let's jump in. Here is Ozark Season 4 Part 2 Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The final scene in this episode was truly something special. I would say from the moment that we first saw Camilla open her mouth at the gala at the Missouri Belle, the tone of the finale changed, the consequences felt real, and the threat that she was conveying was quite literally petrifying. It was here where she discovered and finally got the answer that she was looking for. That it was in fact Ruth Langmore who murdered her son Harvey and not her brother Omar who ordered it. She had known for a while that it wasn't Omar, due to the fact that he had informed her, as he was well aware that she was planning on killing him, due to the reminiscing nature of the conversation that she had when she was speaking with him. My stomach quite literally dropped when she mentioned how Marty and Wendy couldn't reach out to Ruth to let her know that she was well aware, otherwise Jonah and Charlotte would be harmed. You could see the conflict of interest, more so in Wendy than in Marty, which was a surprise and I think a fitting moment for this character. Throughout the entirety of the show, Marty was scrutinized for never putting his family first and always looking out for Ruth and others. But in this final season, and in this moment specifically, he championed his family, and despite everything he'd done for Ruth, he knew he could simply do nothing, which I think made the decision to not get involved even easier for him. He even expressed to Wendy how there was nothing they could do at that specific moment in time, and it would be deadly for them to get involved. It was a heartbreaking moment because we knew within ourselves just how much Marty cared about Ruth, but there was nothing he could do. It was even more sad when we saw the shot of Ruth driving home not knowing that Camilla was there, and the shot of when Camilla's car was just pulled up knowing what was about to unfold. Although the final scene with Ruth was her death, it was beautifully executed and had so much life to it. Ruth being in the white dress then being shot directly in the heart, which had the red blood seeping through to the dress, was a complete contrast and was an image that sticks out in my mind. The white was almost symbolic of an angel, and being shot in the heart to me symbolizes her love being misunderstood. She was an extremely loving character to the people that she cared about, but she was just misunderstood due to all of the harm and hurt that she'd been through in her life. In her final moments, we saw Ruth stay true to her character. In the place where she was building a new life, her own was taken, which is something I thought was extremely moving. The location where she was is symbolic of death, as everybody who was once there has essentially died other than 3. And we saw this at the start of the episode when we saw her envision everybody else back there, almost how it used to be, and now she'd be going on to join them in that location. I loved the fact that Ruth stuck with who she was in the final moment and stated how she didn't regret what she did to Harvey at all, and that she could see where Harvey got it from before yelling out to Camilla to just get on with it. It reminded me of the climax at the end of part 1. Julia Garner can deliver some real powerful hitting lines when necessary, and she definitely did in that moment. Ruth was a character that was fearless from the moment that we were introduced to her, and this performance was every ounce of the character that we've come to know over the 5 years, and it was the perfect way for Ruth to go out. No Langmore ever comes to success, as we heard earlier on in the show. Even Ruth, who was the first clean one in 5 generations, still can't escape the name association. She loved her name, as we heard earlier on in the episode, and she lived and died by that name, standing for what she believed in, and on the cusp of new beginnings. It was poetic, haunting, and extremely sad. Once this moment had concluded, we then followed the Byrds back home when we had the slow pulling back shot through the house, where we were then shown a broken window and we saw that the private investigator Mel was stood there with the goat cookie jar with Ben's ashes in it. I didn't expect this at all. I thought this was going to be the start of the happy ending for the Byrds. I also thought that Mel's arc was completed when he took the job in the police force, but he mentioned how he couldn't do the job because he had the Byrds going round in his head over and over, as I imagine any good officer would. He wanted good to triumph over evil, and if he could contribute to that by taking down the Byrds, but leaving without fulfilling that, then obviously it would feel like an incomplete job. I did notice when he left the motel the cookie jar was there and his eyes caught a glimpse of it, so there was a part of me that thought it would come back to play. Mel actually got to the bottom of the case because deep down he was in fact a good officer. he discovered Ben's ashes that were filled with DNA due to the fact that the crematorium was terrible in the Ozarks. Mel went on to talk about how the Byrds shouldn't be able to live a happily ever after and have the fairy tale ending of just being able to escape and get away with everything, because that's just not how life works. This was then when we heard a weapon load and it cut to Jonah standing there pointing it at Mel. At this point, Marty and Wendy looked happy, and almost proud, one would say, which surprised me. A relationship that was once ripped apart due to violence and the life that the parents sucked Jonah and Charlotte into was now being saved by Jonah, who was originally against it the most. The life Jonah wanted to steer away from was one that he may never be able to escape. Earlier on in the season, Marty mentioned how what they'd done would stay with their kids and that it had derailed them, despite on the surface level it not necessarily seeming like that. But this final shot proved it, especially when it cut to black and the credits started rolling and we heard the shot. We may never know if the Byrds get their happy ending. Tying into what Mel said in his monologue, it carried through to the actual show and the Byrds may not join the Kennedys as royalty. Right now it seems they have another mess that they'd need to clear up, and Jonah also has blood on his hands, the person who was once against it the most in the family. The ending almost provided a full circle moment. Marty got them into this mess, Wendy drove it forward with a selfish attitude for a few seasons. Marty then stepped up in this final part and put his family first, keeping them all safe. And at the end, Jonah, who was once rebelling against them the most and didn't want that style of life, on the cusp of having a normal life taken away, he himself put his family first and was prepared to do anything to get back to reality, even if that meant killing somebody. It was such a powerful way for the show to end. Even on the verge of breaking into a normal life, the evil nuances that they've learned in the past 5 years still come to fruition. Everything was essentially resolved in the show. Omar was taken out, which concluded his arc, Ruth was sadly killed, Ben's case would be left open, so to speak, Helen's case finished at the start of part 2, the cartel were working with the FBI, but with Camilla killing Ruth, I'm uncertain as to how that will now work, as Ruth was the owner of the arrangement, so maybe the deal is gone completely. And I believe once the Byrds find a way of covering up the PI being killed by Jonah, then they may finally get the life that they've always wanted back in Chicago. There is the option on the table that Jonah didn't actually kill the PI and maybe he fired a warning shot, but I think that's up for speculation. Personally, I don't think that's the case. I'm gutted that the show has finally come to an end, but it was the perfect way for it to finish. We got a joyous ride with a whirlwind of emotions, and although we don't know if the Byrds will ever leave the Ozark, we most certainly are. What did you think of the final season? Leave a comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.